My daughter once said to me, a bad day with you is like a day in Disneyland compared to the best day with my birth parents.
Kids that you know have experienced early life trauma and abuse, this seems to actually be a really positive approach.
We're not talking about the minority of children here that require therapeutic parenting. It's the majority of children that require it.
Do you still find there's a huge resistance against the therapeutic models?
Yeah, children have just got to learn and that they need a good smack and that kind of thing. We're giving you the round wheels. If you want to carry on using square ones, well, that is up to you, but it's going to do a lot of damage on the way, so...
If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello. So today I am thrilled to welcome Sarah Naish to the Able to Care podcast. Sarah is a well-respected author, speaker and advocate in the field of therapeutic parenting, best known for her work in supporting parents and carers of children who've experienced trauma. She's a founder of the National Association of Therapeutic Parents and has written several books, including The A to Z of Therapeutic Parenting and The Complete Guide to Therapeutic Parenting, both I'm big fans of. Through her own lived experiences as a mother to 5 adopted children, Sarah has become a leading voice in trauma-informed parenting, helpless countless families navigate the challenges of raising children with complex needs. Her latest ventures include the Centre of Excellence in Child Trauma and the Trauma Informed Parents magazine, which we'll talk about later. So first off, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me, Andy.
And it is a genuine pleasure. It feels like a bit of a milestone in my podcasting journey because I've been a fan of yours for a significant period of time, and I felt brave enough to reach out to see if you'd come on and join us to have a bit of a chat. So it's really appreciated you giving us a bit of time.
That's good. Thank you very much. That's fine.
So if you wouldn't mind to start off with, obviously you've been through quite a personal journey from maybe where you were to what you're doing now and all these different ventures. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what brought you to be so involved in trauma-informed practice and improving understanding around trauma?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started my journey as a nanny, a nursery nurse. That's what I trained as in my teenage years. And I learned all about the naughty step and time out and reward charts and all that. And that's what I lived by. That's what I thought was the right way to do it. And then I became a foster parent just over 35 years ago. And, I started to realise that perhaps a lot of those things didn't work very well, but I didn't really have anything else to go to. And then when those children moved after a year to be adopted, I got interested in social work, so I went into social work. But then later, most importantly, I then adopted my 5 children who are all siblings. And it was at that point that I realised that everything I'd learnt in social work and everything I'd learnt previously didn't really work for children who suffered trauma. And I had to reframe all my thinking. So basically, everything I do now has come out of an identified need. So where I saw there was a gap, I filled it with a service because it's very isolating when you are raising children from trauma. And I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. So that's why we do what we do, really.
So there might be many people listening. So obviously, some of our listeners are foster parents and people from all sorts of care environments. And one of the things that when I was exposed to therapeutic parenting, that kind of opened my eyes to really interconnect all the different behavioral models that I'd come across before. That just suddenly was a case of actually there's something that's missing there throughout. And therapeutic parenting for me, I now teach that or the principles of it across all environments, pretty much. But there's many people out there who may not be familiar with it. So would you mind explaining sort of what it is and maybe what the main differences are from the old super nanny-esque type strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one critical difference is that in therapeutic parenting or trauma-informed parenting, the terms are fairly interchangeable. Instead of looking at what the child is doing and reacting to what the child is doing, i.e., you walk into a room and the child has painted the whole room with pseudocreme, for example, and those happy sort of events that happen in our lives. A standard response would be, why did you do that? How dare you? That's very naughty. And, you can jolly well do this, or I'm taking your pocket money away, whatever. What therapeutic parenting does is it's almost like you have a curtain in front of the child and you pull the curtain away and you look behind the behavior. You look behind what you're seeing. You take a pause if you can, as long as possible. And you think about, why has this happened? What's going on here? Why would the child do this? And then in therapeutic parenting, that's what we are having the dialogue with. We're talking to the child about what we think has happened and why we think it's happened, and responding to that unmet need that the child is showing us through the behaviour.
Yeah, it's the sort of learning to respond rather than react kind of premise, isn't it? And taking that kind of that breath beforehand to kind of explore behind. Is that something that so did you learn that over a period of time? Where did your kind of understanding of this come from, and how early in the journey with your 5 adopted children did you start instigating that?
I would say I was lucky in that I had fostered first and I'd already had year and a half of thinking, oh, I'm not sure my go-to strategies work very well. So I had that embedded. And I did think when my children came to live with me, I did think, well, they've had trauma. So obviously it's going to take 6 months to get them sorted out and get them feeling secure. And I would say within that 6 months to 1 year period, I realised that I had drastically oversimplified the whole thing, and it really came home to me. I think at a point where one day I'd got my 2 older children to sit down at the table and write, if you like, write about why they'd had a punch up in the bathroom. Very standard parenting. And what they did was gouge holes on the table with their pens, try to stab each other with their pens, and rip the pages up. And I remember looking at them thinking, yeah, no, there's something offline here. There's something where, they're not accessing it. I could have done that with a securely attached child and got them to reflect and think about their own behaviour. And it became clear to me that my children could not reflect on their own behaviour. And sometimes they didn't even have a memory of what they've done, let alone be able to answer why they'd done something. And so it dawned on me in the first couple of years that it was up to me to provide the answer to the question why, and the children couldn't do that. But I'm not saying I instantly became really good at doing that. It was a very long learning process, about 10 years, I'd say.
And I say it's a habit that you've got to develop, isn't it? It's something that you've got to kind of really work hard to kind of change and not go into old parenting scripts, which I think is something that any parent really struggles not to. So one of the things that I've found, and definitely I think you pointed out in some of your works as well, that this isn't just something that can be beneficial for kids that have experienced early life trauma and abuse. This seems to actually be a really positive approach for any child who's either highly sensitive or experiences high anxiety across the board. Have you found that the case, and are more people adopting the strategy, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the co-founder of COACT with me, Sarah Penner, she's the parent of 2 securely attached birth children, but they have they suffered in utero trauma due to her illness during her pregnancies. So they have like autism, high cortisol, that kind of thing. And the therapeutic parenting strategies are equally as effective for children like that. So when I work with schools, especially head teachers, I find it quite interesting because they quite often come into the training a little bit like, oh, we're going to come in and talk about the foster children in school, which is like 2%. So I always start off by saying to them, how many children percentage-wise would you say are in foster care? How many are in adoption? I add it all up. And then I go into how many children are on the edge of care? How many children are living in an environment you think is unsafe? You have concerns about, and that's usually quite a high percentage. And then I go into how many children do you think went into hospital under the age of 2 and suffered some kind of real illness? How many children do you think suffered in utero trauma? And when you get to it, it's always over 60%. We're not talking about the minority of children here that require therapeutic parenting. It's the majority of children that require it. And the other sort of 30 to 40%, they'll be fine too, because it works first time every time with the securely attached children. That's what my grandchildren taught me, which is great.
Do you still find, though, there's a reluctance, a resistance as far as the ingrained notion of kind of behaviourist models, the punishment reward kind of old logic parenting and stuff? Do you still find there's a huge resistance against the therapeutic models?
Much less so now than when I started. I think since the A to Z of therapeutic parenting hit the bookshelves, I think that really helped me actually with getting the message out there. And certainly when I first started delivering training, I used to get a lot of people saying, oh, but they've got to learn and all that kind of thing. There's much more knowledge out there now. We've got a Facebook page where we've got a lot of people on that. And there's just a higher level of understanding. That's not to say, of course, I did a post recently about consequences, about natural consequences, logical consequences. And straight away, somebody commented and said, yeah, children have just got to learn and they need a good smack and that kind of thing. And I said to them, I don't think you've read my explanation. I think you're getting us mixed up with gentle parenting, because therapeutic parenting is not gentle parenting. We're very strong people. We have a very robust set of boundaries and structure and routine, and there are consequences for negative behaviour. It's just that those consequences are linked to the child's behaviour, so they can link cause and effect. So we educate through our answers, but there's always going to be people, aren't there, that don't want to learn. I mean, that's what it boils down to. We deal with social workers, therapists who are so, entrenched in what they believe and they don't want to look at other ways. So we look at it, I often say, we're giving you the round wheels. If you want to carry on using square ones, well, that is up to you, but it's going to do a lot of damage on the way. So.
Yeah. Definitely. I think the bit you just mentioned there, as far as the confusion a little bit, I've definitely come across that with certain environments where the therapeutic parenting principles, I think some schools are a prime example where they kind of look at it, but then kind of do decide it's kind of letting the kids do whatever they want to do. And that's kind of then puts it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel appropriate. But as you rightly said, it is hugely boundaried. It's very boundaried and clear routines. It's just when you're instigating those boundaries, you still do it from a therapeutic position.
Exactly. My children now, all adults, none of them would describe my parenting as having let them do whatever they wanted to do. That's the worst thing you can do, actually. You wouldn't be a therapeutic parent because our children need that structure. My friend Jane Mitchell says our children need CPI, consistency, predictability, reliability. Well, how do we help a child from trauma to predict the future? We give them a routine, we give them a structure, and that helps them to perhaps feel safe for the first time. So although my children might well have tried to get me to change that, and, certainly my eldest daughter was very keen that I should give her banoffee pie for tea every day because that's what she wanted. That absolutely wasn't going to happen, So, it's about helping our children to understand that we, as the safe, unassailable safe base, we are in charge, we've got them, and we're going to make sure everything's okay.
I think that's where the confusion is sometimes as well, isn't it? That when you ask the question, and I always think it's a good question when I'm working with groups, kind of, do children like boundaries? And it is interesting that the response from that question speaks volumes, because usually most groups say no. and is actually completely the opposite. They absolutely love them. They need them. They may help them to feel safe, but it feels counterintuitive because they push against them. But I don't know whether it's something you might have taught out in the world, but I got it from somebody else using the roller coaster analogy, which is when the harness is pulled down on the roller coaster, everybody pushes it to make sure it's safe. And that doesn't mean you don't like the harness. You just need to make sure it's robust and it's not going to let you fall out. So
if children don't know how far they can go, they don't know how far it is to go back. And what I mean by that is, if you've set the boundary, you see it with little kids, don't you? That they'll run off and run and play, but they're kind of looking behind them to see where you are. So they're happy to go off as long as they know where you, as the main person in their life, is. If that same child was suddenly in the middle of a field with no adult carer there, they'd be terrified. And when you take boundaries away from traumatized children, that's what they are. They're terrified.
You've obviously helped hundreds and thousands of parents and caregivers over your time doing this job. Have you got kind of what are the most common challenges that you find that people encounter?
I think one of the biggest problems that therapeutic parents have is, first of all, learning that important pause, like learning that very first step of being able to step back and think about what's going on so that they can, really reflect back to the child what's going on and then link up what they're going to do about it. They find that a struggle. But I would also say, hot on the heels of that, it isn't the children's behaviour, because if you get the right training and information, you can deal with that. It's the lack of understanding of people around them. And that's what causes so much isolation. Now, that might be family, friends, but it might also worryingly be social workers. And as I said, I'm a former social worker, therapists, school. Sometimes there's a bit of indulging in blame rather than solving a complex problem. That's very, very isolating, because the parent is left with a feeling that they're doing something wrong or they've done something wrong, and the people they feel they should be able to reach out to don't. So I don't know. If you know, but in social work training nowadays, there's not even training in trauma-informed practice.
I've come across it. Yeah, this is always one of the things that I sometimes find worrying. And there's some foster agencies that I work with that are amazing at this. They always make sure that there is social workers on the courses that alongside the foster parents. But a lot of the times they don't. And therefore, who is the foster parent going to call up when there's a challenge, when there's something difficult? A social worker that they think should know what to do, but actually hasn't actually done the relevant training and learnt the most updated models and strategies. It's a bit of a shame for them.
And that's why we've actually, we've really identified that as a need. I mean, I'm very much a person who looks at what the problem is and then works hard to provide a solution, because, social workers want to get it. They're not bad people. They didn't go to university in order to make people's lives more difficult. But that training isn't really there. So that's why we're just about to launch our level 4 in trauma-informed practice for social workers, because it's so needed. And, many people want to do that and want to be able to get alongside foster parents and adopters and kinship carers and really be able to work with them and not feel like they're working against them.
I've noticed a few posts actually that you've been doing talking about kinship parents particularly. Is that a bit of an area of interest for you at the moment? Are you kind of doing some focus around that?
Yeah, I mean, within National Association of Therapeutic Parents, a lot of our members there are kinship carers. And what we know from running compassion fatigue events is that kinship carers are the least supported in the in that sector. So when you look at levels of support, there's quite high levels for foster parents, lower for adopters once they've adopted. And depending on the local authority, it goes from non-existent to adversary for, some parents, some kinship carers. Kinship carers have often given up everything to, and I think what really annoys me about kinship care, about the structure that they're working in, is they're people that have given up a lot to take on maybe grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever. But because we don't have a proper kinship system in the UK, what social services are forced to do is try to force kinship carers into the fostering system. Well, they didn't ask to be foster carers. They have a relationship with this child, and you're suddenly in this horrible situation where you're trying to deal with the fallout within your family, and then you've got to have somebody coming around looking at your fridge to see, if your food's literally that bad. And so, and because we have experience of that within my own family in the last 2 years, that really opened my eyes to, I always knew it was bad. I didn't realise how bad it was. So we have worked with Dorset County Council actually about changing the whole way that kinship carers are supported, assessed and approved, because at the moment it's, it's diabolical. There's not really another word for it, to be honest.
Well, I know that one of the things that you strongly advocate for, and you always mention as far as your training and also in your books as well, is a kind of aspect of self-care for anybody looking after children who've experienced early life trauma and difficulties. What would you say are because when I'm teaching about it or when I'm talking about it, the general kind of thing is, I don't have time. And I'm sure you come across it all the time. That's lovely in theory, but I don't have time. What's your kind of best strategies or the best way of kind of overcoming that mindset?
So I totally get that, because I was one of those people. When I had 5 teenagers, and I had a social worker come around and start talking about self-care, the conversation went something like this: "Do you need to take time for yourself?" I said, "Yeah, really, do I? Do I? So are you going to come look after the children for me while I go out for a walk then?" She said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Yeah, I thought not." I said, "I haven't even got time to run the bath, let alone put bath bombs in it." I used to cut my hair with nail scissors and circulate between 3 tracksuits when my children were young. So when people used to talk about self-care, I would want to throw bath bombs at their head, literally. How I see it now, though, is it's about essential maintenance. If someone had talked to me about essential maintenance rather than self-care, I would have listened to them. Because if I don't look after myself, I can't look after my children. So I've got to do the bare minimum. And the bare minimum means sometimes it's as simple as walking away from the arguing children. This is what I used to do. I'd go out in the garden, I'd go into the decking and I'd look at the sky. And I would just hear different things and see different things and take my mind away from that toxic stress that was building up. And sometimes those breaks could be longer. I used to have a friend that I used to get to come in so I could go to the local travel lodge for the night occasionally. Because if I hadn't done that, things could have got very serious. And I don't think nobody can carry on forever. You've got to give yourself those little breaks, those little pauses, that time out. And you've got to, so one of the things I used to do, this is my top tip actually. I used to go to Sainsbury's when my husband came home from work, and we had all sorts of strategies around that. I suddenly remember something I had to get at Sainsbury's or any other supermarket. And I'd go down there and I'd take a bag and I'd put a couple of things in, but actually I'd sit in the cafe and have a coffee. So as far as the children were concerned, I was busy shopping. They didn't want to come with me to do that. It was boring. But I could just sit there and have a coffee. You've got to look at places in your day where you can build in that sneaky pause time for you. Really important, because otherwise you have no recovery time, no reflection time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? That's a really useful tip, even just changing that mindset to essential maintenance rather than the language we use as self-care, because I think it's so difficult for many people who do, step into the journey of being a foster parent, a caregiver of any child. And I had a group the other day where I asked them two questions, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is self-care? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at it? And everybody said 10. Everybody was 10 on how important it is. But then they put like 3 or 4 on the how good they were at it. So there's like huge cognitive dissonance. But I'd say, I don't believe you. I don't think you are putting it at 10. I think you're playing lip service to the fact you've been told you should put it at 10. But I guarantee 100 other things in your day will come first and you'll put it down there. Actually, its importance is 1, 2, if I have time. But changing the language a little bit is really important. You wouldn't go without food.
No, exactly. And it is food for the soul. And that's why you need to look at your routine now and look at where those natural pauses can be manufactured and put in. That's what I did. That's what saved my life, really, doing that.
Yeah. I think you refer to a few bits as well. And I think I've definitely taken some of your ideas and kind of passed them on to others as well. Things like the reward chart, but the one for parents. I think that's
Yeah.
one of yours, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Which I
Yeah.
think is a great idea, and I've always had fun. Kind of created those for myself as much as for anybody else. And I've actually instigated that kind of thing into workplaces. I don't know whether you've done that as well. Have you got some schools that utilise the reward chart for the staff or anything like that?
I'm not sure. We've got a few schools that work with us that are trauma-informed schools, and they do have incentive rewards for the staff, and they're very, very good at looking after their emotional well-being. They're much more into that, I would say, than schools that perhaps aren't trauma-informed. I'm not aware about any of them yet doing a reward chart, but I bet there is one. Someone's going to tell me there is. I'll have to ask Sarah, who's a trustee at one of them, if they've done that yet, and if not, they might want to do it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge, and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description. Obviously, within the kind of the trauma-informed kind of aspect, again, this is one of the things that I hear a lot of lip service around. We are trauma-informed and things like that. But what would you say, as far as any organisation, how can they ensure that they are being trauma-informed, how they're adhering to that, and they make it a cultural norm as well? Because I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Making it culturally. I know that's a big question for a short podcast.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people out there that say they're trauma informed. So, for example, we work with a lot of fostering agencies and fostering teams. And because we have our therapeutic fostering assessment, we only allow people to use that who are therapeutic generally, or genuinely trauma informed, or striving to be. How do we look at that? What do we look at? Well, some of the bigger IFAs that are making a ton of money, like millions of pounds, I would say, I guess they're not trauma informed, because they're not kind of, their ethos and morals doesn't tie up with it. But sometimes people think, I've got a therapist coming in once a month and therefore we're therapeutic. That definitely doesn't make you therapeutic. So what an independent fostering agency looks like, it's therapeutic, like the ones we run, it starts when you set the agency up with your policies and procedures. So when we're working with other fostering agencies, we say, well, for example, what's your policy on when a foster parent starts to struggle? Like, what is that? What does that look like? And our policy would be something along the lines of, you've got your social worker in there, but you've also got an empathic listener. You've got somebody who's been a foster parent, been an adopter, been in their shoes, and is there to listen to. So that's one of the questions I ask people. When they tell me they're therapeutic, I say, who's listening to? Who have you got listening to? And if they say a therapist, I say, what's their background? And if they're like a counsellor, really, that's done a 3-year counselling course but has no lived-in experience, they can't really provide that empathic, active listening. Because when you are talking to somebody who's got the same experiences as you have that real kind of heart-to-heart connection. And that's what keeps us out of compassion fatigue. So I look at that kind of level of understanding about how people are putting that in place. In a school, I would say, what would you do in a situation where a child ran out of the classroom and went into the field? If they say to me, well, he'd get detention and, that kind of thing, or, well, we'd be very concerned about that health and safety policy, blah, blah. That's not a trauma-informed school. If they're saying, well, we'd be thinking about why that happened and what we can put in place to make them feel safe, and we've got this escape room, I can say, okay. So people usually fall between trying really hard, actually really doing it really well, or paying lip service because they think they can get more money from the government by saying they're trauma informed. There's quite a lot of that going on, to be fair.
Yes. That's the cynical side of your nature going out there, but unfortunately,
the
that is the
honesty of
case.
it, yeah, it's
Yeah,
true.
absolutely. So what do you think, there still needs to be a lot of education, especially across the education systems where I find it maybe the weakest? I think, fostering is an awful lot better than it ever has been. And even primary schools are a little bit more on board. They seem to be kind of stepping in the right direction. But for me, secondary schools have still got an awful long way to go as far as, how do you think we can get that message out there to them? How do you think they can have their awareness raised?
Well, the first thing they could do is they could read the book we brought out last year, which is The A to Z of Trauma-Informed Teaching. And that was written by our schools team that run trauma-informed schools very, very successfully. They've seen huge improvements in attainment and retention. So, that's one great thing is it does work and it stops people in really struggling with some of the day-to-day stuff. But also, the training, they've got to make sure the training they're getting is the right training from someone who really gets it. There's no point just getting someone that's got a catchy name who talks about trauma. They've got to give them the strategies. They've got to say, like, when the child does this, this is why the child's doing it, and this is what you need to do. It doesn't actually cost anything, or not very much, certainly, to become a trauma-informed school. We have got qualifications for teachers to become a trauma-informed teacher as well. We as you know, that's what we do. We look at it and go, oh, there's not a qualification for that. Or the one that's out there perhaps doesn't go quite far enough to that level of understanding that we need. And we've run some free workshops all around the country in the last year where we just go and say anyone can turn up. We've had loads of social workers and teachers coming to those. And we've literally explained the basics about why do our children do the things they do and how do we need to respond to that? And you see all the light bulbs going on around the room. And they can access all that online as well. So we are trying to get it out there.
Have you come across a lot of parents, foster parents, who one of the things they find most challenging, that they're taking all of this stuff on board, but they don't know how to get the environment that the kids are also in, the schools and stuff, to actually adopt it? And have you come across any kind of tips to help them?
Well, interestingly, that is the reason why I wrote the very first book I did about 10 years ago, because I was training foster parents and they were saying exactly that. And I know that. I moved my children 125 miles to get them into the school they needed to be in. And it's absolutely horrendous when you are surrounded by people who don't get it. It's awful. And they said to me, but the thing is, we go into school and we know all this, and they do, because you have to learn it because you're living with the child. And then we go and say to the teacher, well, the reason he's running out is because something's triggered him and and actually you need to help him to calm before you can talk to him. And the teacher says, well, they've just got to learn because they're 8 now. So I wrote Therapeutic Parenting in a Nutshell for that reason. It was a very small little, like, almost idiot's guide. And that just flew off the shelves. And I self-published. I did it on Amazon because I just couldn't be bothered to post all the stuff out. And it really, really went well. And that's what people started giving to the schools and the social workers, and saying, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing, therapeutic parenting. So then I have done, you can still find them on YouTube. I did a very quick free overview. What is therapeutic parenting? I've got a free video on understanding your traumatized child. So I put that out there specifically so people could say, watch this, look at this. And that gives people enough to kind of get them on the right road, I think.
So as far as, do you mind if I ask around some specific challenges that we sometimes come across and your kind of top tips on these? So one of the ones, because we've had a few foster agencies we work with who heard you were coming on and they were excited. So I've had some questions been sent over. They tried to hijack my podcast. So sleep. is one of the challenges that many of the foster parents encounter. And obviously, I remember watching an early Super Nanny episode where it was a case of you just basically just keep persistently putting the child to bed and not engaging or communicating, and you just repeat that over a certain time. And that doesn't fall under the therapeutic model. So what's your approach, or what would your top tips be about helping children who are struggling with their sleeping habits?
Okay, well, first of all, if anyone's wants a lot more on this, we have got a free podcast ourselves called the Therapeutic Parenting Podcast, and I believe there's a whole episode on sleep and bedtime. But what we do with any behaviour, first of all, we're looking at what is the unmet need, and we have to look at what is the child's behaviour telling us. So a child, my son, for example, he would get up a lot, or he would kind of not go to bed. And when you look at that in terms of the why, rather than he's not going to bed and it's really naughty, you change how you respond to it. So what I do is I link that back to his early life. And in his early life, he was left alone for very long periods of time. A lot of our children have suffered neglect. It means they weren't being fed. It means they were hungry in the night and they were left perhaps in soiled nappies or whatever. But anyway, having a really horrible time. Now, it isn't that the child has come and moved in with you and someone's told them you're safe and therefore the child can relax now and go to bed. Unfortunately, that terror is hardwired in, that terror of being forgotten. If I'm forgotten, if I'm my own, I might die. So when they go to bed, they're alone. They're alone with memories, they're alone with their trauma, and worst of all, they're away from you and they don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're getting drunk like mummy and daddy did. I'm not saying all birth parents are alcoholics, but that is the lived-in experience. Some of our children, maybe you're doing drugs, maybe you've gone out, maybe you're not there, maybe you've fallen over, maybe you've hurt yourself. So they've got this constant anxiety, and we have to really understand that in order to resolve it. So what does a young baby need? What did our children miss out on when they should have been sleeping peacefully in their cots and beds without a care in the world? Well, they missed out on safety and reassurance and parental presence. So we've got to put that back in. So what I did with my children is I simply went back a few stages and treated them like they were much, much younger children. So, putting them to bed, staying around, maybe rocking them. And I remember with my daughter, I did this thing where I would sit next to her bed for quite a long time. And then I'd gradually, over the weeks, I'd gradually move further away. And it got to a point where I would put my slippers, I'd just be standing in the door and she'd talk to me and I'd just poke my head around the door and say, I'm still here. And I thought, well, I could just leave my slippers poking through the door and I'd step out them and go downstairs. But if she woke up, she'd see the slippers and she'd think I was standing there all night. So what I'm putting back in there for her is what she's lost. She's lost the mum. She's lost the reassuring, comforting parental presence. And that's why they can't stay in bed. They can't settle. Some of our parents, I know, they have blow-up beds and they sleep next to the child, just like you would with a 6-month-old baby. You have them in your room, don't you? So you have to look at it from that perspective, I think, really, to help resolve it.
I think that's one of the simplest things that you kind of mentioned somewhere. I'm sure it was, again, something that I read from yourself, which is a lot of therapeutic parenting is just common sense parenting that you'd apply to a younger child, just apply to anybody, which, as you just kind of gave the example there, that kind of fits in nicely. This is one of the things that I think people struggle with, though, is but how long is that going to have? How long am I going to have to do that for?
It depends really on the child, your relationship, and the level of unmet needs. So, for example, that little story I just told you about with my daughter, I would say over a 3-month period, she was able to settle into sleep. With my son, it was a lot longer, and he would have night terrors and things like that. So it went on longer. With other behaviours, like, for example, my eldest daughter, who'd always needed to be in control of everything, would never agree that I might be right. And it's quite exhausting parenting a child that really doesn't want to be parented. That took 10 years to get to a point where she went, oh, actually, do you know, I think you've got this. I think you can, I'm going to trust you. So it does depend on the child's early history, their experience they had, and what unmet needs they are. But if you just look at it like you're dealing with a much younger child. At what age, you always turn it on and said, at what age would I expect to see these behaviours? At what age would you expect to see a child who is waking constantly in the night? 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. You're not going to go into that child and go, right, that's it. I've told you 10 times now. You need to be quiet. You're going to be tired in the morning. Baby doesn't care, doesn't understand, and nor do our children.
That relating it over to what typical developmental age would you see that kind of behavior in, and then kind of shifting your expectations to that particular age. The controlling factor, I think this is another area that I find people find really counterintuitive. So controlling behavior is quite common in many of the children that have come from difficult backgrounds, because other people controlling them probably has meant danger in the past. But the instinct, I think, for many places, and I find this for those with conditions like ODD or pathological demand avoidance as well, the instinct sometimes is because they want control. We need to take all the control away from them to then teach them they can be okay without it. Whereas it's the collaborative approach, isn't it, as far as allowing them to feel safe within the control they have within an umbrella of us keeping them safe. Is that a fairly okay way of describing it, or how do you approach it?
The way I look at it, it's probably a good idea to use my plane analogy here, actually. So I always look at it like, I always say my children were born on a plane. Unfortunately, the plane was flown by unskilled pilots, and that meant that the children fell all over the plane. They weren't strapped in. They never knew when food was coming. And my eldest daughter in particular, the eldest of all the children, she'd be banging on the cockpit door and finding that the parents were drugged or asleep or crashing the plane, and she'd be jumping up there and trying to land the plane the best she could. So when she's then moved to my plane by social services, who assure her that I'm safe and I can fly planes and I'm all right, she's not going to get on my plane and go, oh, phew, I can relax now, because her whole lived-in experience is that adults cannot fly planes, adults cannot parent, adults are dangerous people. So the way that control is a manifestation of absolute terror. And I think it's really important that we remember that this isn't about a child being a little control freak and manipulating me. This is a child who is terrified and cannot let go of the reins because we all might die. So sure, she's going to bang on the cockpit door and she's going to say to me, like she did, Mummy, it's all right. I know, Sophie wears this and so does that, and I've got all their clothes out. And I'd say to her, well, thank you for helping me. But as you can see, I've thought about that and this is what I've done. And, it's great that you're helping, but actually, I'm mum and I've got this. And the way that I did that was quite gently, but I would also always be telling her that I understood why she did that and why she was terrified. So I'd be saying, I think sometimes, you need to check that I've done this or I've remembered this, because in the past people didn't remember this and do this. But I am always going to remember. I'm always going to say what I mean and mean what I say. And I know it's going to take you a long time to learn that. So, just telling our children, going back to the plane now, just telling our children we can fly a plane doesn't mean they're going to relax and go back and sit down. They need to see that we land that plane safely 500 times before they're going to, give up some of their control. But in the meantime, we thank them for their advice and their input and do what we were going to do in the first place anyway.
So one of the things, obviously, you've gathered this huge amount of experience and knowledge over your journey. And I should imagine when you've been writing the books, it's really helped you kind of self-reflect on some of your practices and fine-tune them, especially with the analogies that I'm sure you remind yourself of. One of the things I've encountered, though, the people who are on their journey still, especially when they do you sometimes find some parents, foster parents, teachers, listen to what you say and then feel an element of shame and guilt because they think then they've suddenly done it wrong? And maybe, have you ever felt like that yourself as well?
Yeah, so first of all, people will say to me and Sarah Dillon when we go and do our training, often they'll come up to us afterwards and say, oh, I feel terrible because I've been fostering for 25 years and I've only just heard this stuff today and I didn't know this stuff and I feel terrible. And I always say to them, okay, so have you been feeding the children? Yeah. Have you been doing that pretty regularly? Have you got a strong routine? Yeah. Have you got structure, boundaries? Yes. I said, right, you've already got all the foundations, so to therapeutic parenting, because you've given your children the gift of consistency, reliability, predictability. Now you can add in this whole kind of looking behind the behaviour and experience because they've got the safety. So people are quite relieved about that. The thing that I wish I had known more about or understood more about really was in the teenage years, where lots of things change then. So my son, for example, who was, I mean, he was a child from trauma and there was very extensive trauma, but to parent, he wasn't too tricky, really. He was quite a rewarding child. And then when he hit 15, like a lot of our children, he turned into this completely different child. And I for too long tried to hold on to, you need to do this and this is the way it is that. And I needed to give him more leeway earlier. I needed to trust him a bit more earlier than I did. So I think that what's really difficult in therapeutic parenting is you become very good at this boundary structure routine. But when children are teenagers, they still need their boundaries, they still need their structure, still need their routine. But there's got to be more understanding within that. For example, when he ran away, which he did regularly, I would message him and I'd say, you need to get back here right now because, everyone's very worried and I'm going to call the police and stuff like that. That's not therapeutic parenting, by the way. It's just parent panic. And what I know now was that stopped him coming back. I needed to say, I'm thinking about you, or send a picture of the dogs, or so-and-so's missing you, or oh, it's gone past dinner time now, but I've put your dinner in the fridge. I needed to be talking to his terror still, because it resurfaces at 15, and saying to him, I'm still here, I'm still reliable, I'm still predictable. That's what I needed to be saying. So I wish I had known that.
Yeah. And I think that's so naturally difficult for parents, isn't it? And as you mentioned it towards the beginning of when we were chatting, it's sometimes the external expectations of other people that it's easy to fall into the trap, isn't it? Because other people are going, well, they're a teenager now. He's 15 now, he should. That straight away the instinct, or you feel that requirement to go, well, I need to change the way I parent. But yeah, it's kind of it's the same model, but I always say it's almost you do the same kind of therapeutic principle, just sometimes from a bit more of a 10-foot range. It might be through a door now rather than actually being able to go into the room, but it's constantly reinforcing that love, that nurturing, that safety, because their brains revert back to a toddler way in the way it functions anyway. So you've got to kind of adjust your strategy. And I think it's so easy, isn't it, to go typical teenager, just immediately the typical teenager kind of language and model coming out. That again stops you being able to follow the proper practices.
I would have loved to have had typical teenagers. That would have been a holiday.
What was the age difference between your 5 children?
7 years. So 7 years between the 5 children. So when they came to me, I had the younger 3 first, and then a year later, the older 2 joined us. So yeah, very close together.
Yeah, they were very close together, weren't they? So did you have a point in your household where they were all in your household at the same time as teenagers as well, did you mention?
Yes, it was 2 weeks.
Wow.
There was 2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks.
Where one was 13 and one was 19. And then the eldest one turned 20. So there was like 6 years and 50 weeks between them, you see. So I was able, that 2 weeks, I was like, I got 5 teenagers.
That's amazing.
But because of their age, their emotional age, they were kind of teens into their 20s, really. So they were very young in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Do you think you got better at the self-care side of things as well? Did you get stricter with yourself as far as the self-care's concerned?
I got better when I had 2 strokes. My body taught me to jolly well, and that's why now I'm a great advocate for essential care, because I was absolutely the person that just kept on going and ignoring the headaches and ignoring the feeling of my brain frying and exhaustion, absolute exhaustion all the time. And then I had a stroke when I was speaking to a social worker about my son. And she said to me, what do you think will happen to him? And I said, I think he'll die. And it was at that moment I had a stroke. And so I was in hospital for a week, and it was great. I had a fantastic holiday because I felt all right, actually, afterwards. Within 24 hours, 48 hours, I felt all right. And I had, the children could only come and visit at visiting times. I could wander about the hospital. I could have lunch. And it was during that week that I was like, this is what's happened. My body's
Yeah.
forcing me to stop. So ever since that time, I've been very good at going, do you know what? This is all getting a little bit much. I'm going to just go and stand in the garden for a minute. I'm just going to go away. So as the children got older and as they began to leave home, I started going on cruises because you know what, on cruises, you don't really have very good coverage. And I'm not really contactable for a few days at a time. So my self-care's probably gone a bit too far the other way now, probably. but the children don't live at home, so that's fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, you allowed it. You deserve it. You've got those strategies. And a couple of sea days probably booked into every one of your cruises where
Definitely.
you can get them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're still obviously, one of the things that I think is lovely, and you mentioned it kind of briefly earlier, you've written books, you've got these initiatives that you do as far as the National Association of Therapeutic Parents. You've got a connection with your own foster agency as well, because I know there's some of the things you were mentioning about being in trauma-informed foster agency. I think when I went online and looked into everything that you do, it mentioned those specific kind of criteria and stuff. But is there kind of are you still finding new approaches and new kind of exciting developments as you kind of move forwards within this field?
Yeah, definitely. And what's great is we can try them out in our agencies. So, for example, we've got a thing that Sarah Dillon devised called the trauma tracker, because we felt that, when a child moves in with the foster family, their behaviours tell you quite a lot. And often foster parents say, well, we haven't got his history. They haven't given us that happens too often. So what we started doing was turning on our head and saying, what's his behaviour telling us? So we have this thing called a trauma tracker. So once we'd done that and we worked out, we can more or less work out what's happening with the child and when they're going to do stuff and why. We then put that into a tool and then put that into a book and then issue training on it with other agencies and local authorities. So we're always, we use that place for innovative practice. And that's where we try things out, we work things out, and then we share them with the community. And some people really want to take that up, and some people are very stuck in old ways. I find that quite interesting. But it's for us, it's a no-brainer, really.
Well, that's it. It provides you such a unique opportunity, doesn't it? That you can actually kind of find this, try it out, get some actual genuine feedback and see, this is making a difference, 100%.
Yeah, we have very high stability rates in our fostering agencies. It's over 95%. Children don't move, foster parents don't go. It's very, very high because it's all therapeutic parenting. That's why it's simple, really.
Well, and also you're putting in, as part of the therapeutic parenting model, you are putting in those kind of strong foundations of essential maintenance with a team, a trusted team, so as the essential listener. I think you described it. Was that the term
we have empathic listeners. We employ empathic listeners. Yeah, I think the other thing that makes a massive difference is when you've got, say, for example, a local authority that might decide they're going to move this child now for no apparent reason other than they think it's going to be cheaper to put him somewhere else. Or, they look at the child's behaviour and they think, this is very difficult, no one can manage, let's move him. I think what our foster parents really like is, and we do call them foster parents, not foster carers, we call them therapeutic foster parents, is that, one of the expert team who's usually an adopter or foster parent or former child in care and also qualified as a social worker, therapist, whatever, goes to the meeting and literally explains to the social workers, if they don't know, this is what's happening, this is why, this is where the child's coming from, this is how we need to respond. So our foster parents feel really supported in that. They don't feel like they're a voice in the wilderness, and they know that we've got their back. But we do that, obviously, to support foster parents, but mainly to keep children where they need to be in a safe environment.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think many foster parents don't always know how to. I don't know whether they don't know how to present themselves in that professional capacity, or whether they're just not perceived as, they're almost seen as slightly emotional parents rather than professionals in their own right.
Yes.
Having that advocate with them that's been perceived purely as a professional allows them to say what they need to say, but from a position that's actually being taken seriously.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why in our assessment process, our applicants, they actually gain a qualification in therapeutic fostering during the assessment, because they
Mm.
do need to hold their ground in meetings with people who might not get it. And,
Yeah.
I think it really helps they've got that qualification behind them and they do know what they're talking about, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so you've got these two. You said just before this you were in a big meeting as far as you're kind of changing things or doing things. There's some big exciting things ahead for you and the different organisations that you're connected with.
Mm.
So would you mind telling me a little bit about the Centre of Excellence in Child Trauma, what it is, what the future plans are, and yeah,
Yeah.
let's hear a bit more about it.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the Centre of Excellence in Child Trauma is an umbrella term. And underneath that, we've got like True Fostering in England, and which is an employee-owned trust. And we've got Safer Fostering in Wales, which is a not-for-profit. But we also have Inspire Training that does all our face-to-face training. We've got Trauma Revolution that does all our webinars, online webinars. And then we've got qualifications. We're the only organisation doing independently accredited qualifications in trauma-informed practice and life story work. And we have the Haven, which is a pretty groundbreaking organisation that helps get parents out of compassion fatigue and reconnected to their children. And of course, we've also got the National Association of Therapeutic Parents. But the problem is, it's quite bitty. All of these things were set up in response to people's need. And now we've got to a point where it's all, people go, well, do I go there or do I go here or do I go there? So what we're doing is we're combining everything together and making COACT a charitable trust. So it's basically become a one-stop shop where you just go, if you're either a parent who is looking after children from trauma or neurodiverse children, or a professional working with those people, you come there and we've basically got everything you need in one place. So that includes things like the Tips magazine, which is Trauma-Informed Parents. Anyone can get that. We bring that out once every 2 months. And that's got loads of great articles that you can read, ranging from my child was removed at birth, why are they still acting out, that kind of thing, into school challenges. And they're all very relevant. So, so we're just putting everything into one place. And I think that's going to simplify things for us as a staff team. And also it does definitely go in. We don't think there should be, I don't think personally there should be any profit in caring for vulnerable children. I think that it's fine to draw a good salary and to pay people what they're worth, but I think the money should go back into providing the services for the children. So this charity will make sure there's trust funds there for all the children that looked after by Safer Fostering and True Fostering when they are over 25. Because at the moment, there's loads of stuff, they can access at 18. I'm not being funny, but when my children were 18, no, they're not emotionally there. But at 25, we see a lot of changes in our children's brains. So they will be able to access their money once they're 25.
That's amazing. Oh, that's a really good way of kind of approaching it and giving them, improving their future chances. Because one of the conversations I've had quite a lot on here, we've had some amazing people like Fatima Whitbread, for instance, is doing a lot of work to try to raise awareness for children who've been through the care system and got care experience to try and have a better chance when they come out the other end. And I've had some conversations with people who are trying to raise being looked after as a kind of a protected characteristic. So the fact that some of them coming out of the other side of their journeys with some money in the bank to kind of go, you can still build a future is just fantastic. That's
Yeah,
really positive.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
wonderful. So thank you so much for your time over this podcast. It's one of those I could have a list of 1,000 questions and just keep blasting you with, but I feel that people need to go and check out your information, your books, and your podcast as well, and things like that. So I don't want to steal the thunder, but hopefully there's some people out there who have found this interesting. Is there any kind of, if you had like kind of one main key message for people looking after and raising children who do have come from difficult backgrounds or trauma informed, what would it be?
It would be, don't beat yourself up. We will have bad days. When you have a bad day with your child, it doesn't undo all the work you've done with them. It doesn't put out all the synapses you've put in their brain, all the connections you've made. you have another day, and you can just keep building on what you've built on. It's so give yourself a break, because you will make mistakes. Of course you will. But our children, my daughter once said to me, a bad day with you is like a day in Disneyland compared to the best day with my birth parents. And I think we forget that.
That's powerful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. So for all of you out there who've been listening, if you found anything on today's podcast useful, interesting, or informative, please make sure you like, comment, and share it out to others as well. Anybody else you think might find this beneficial. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time today, Sarah. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks.
And I'll speak to you again.
Bye.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. But what if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience, and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation, and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.